Welcome to the episode of Make It Make Sense with Tomee Sojourner-Campbell. I'm so pleased to welcome season two's first guest, Professor Constance Backhouse, a professor at the University of Ottawa in the Faculty of Law, as well as a legal historian. Professor Backhouse, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And so today, I'd love for us to talk about some issues related to consumer racial profiling, but really I wanted to get us started from a historical context. You know, where are some of the ideas of what we now know as consumer racial profiling, how that happened, but more specifically, from your perspective, how do you think regulations and laws were used to enforce historical forms of anti-Black racism in consumer services? And one example would be Viola Desmond.
Right. So she would be a very good historical example. She was a businesswoman who ran a beauty salon and manufactured her own beauty products. And she was traveling throughout Nova Scotia. And she stopped in New Glasgow, a town in Nova Scotia, where she went to a movie and she sat in a seat on the main floor. And she was told by the manager and the ticket seller that she couldn't sit there. And so she thought maybe there'd been a mistake because she learned that the ticket prices were more on the main floor. There were 5 cents more, I believe, on the main floor than they were on the balcony. So she went back to the front desk to pay, and they wouldn't sell her a ticket. They told her that they would not sell main floor seating to you people, was the phrase. So she realized it was a form of race discrimination, and she made the spontaneous decision to go back to the theater. She sat in a seat on the main floor. She was then forcibly, physically removed, dragged out of the theater by a police officer and the theater manager, and locked up in a cell overnight, and went to court the next morning without a lawyer. She wasn't even told she had an opportunity to delay and find a lawyer. And she was charged with a violation of the Theatres Act, which was a piece of regulatory law in Nova Scotia, which required that all theaters pay a tax for every person who they admitted. And the tax was based on the price of the theater ticket. Since she was sitting in a more expensive seat and they would not sell her the more expensive ticket, apparently she was 1 cent short on tax.
Yeah.
And she was convicted for violating the Theatres Act and fined. She then went back home, rallied her forces, hired a lawyer, and went to court in an attempt to overturn her conviction and fine, and she lost. An all-white bench of judges concluded that there was no error in law. So there's an example of what was a neutral law set up to collect revenue from theater owners was used to enforce race discrimination and to send a lesson to individuals who wanted to contest race discrimination. So there's a consumer rule that looks neutral on the surface that is being used as a weapon to control anyone who wishes to resist race discrimination.
And thank you for sharing sort of very briefly the experience that Miss Viola Desmond had at the time. And I know when I read your chapter on Miss Desmond's experience and sort of the surrounding context of what was going on, for me, what was striking was the level of violence that she was subjected to. Right. And oftentimes when we talk about racial profiling in a broader context, we look at issues related to police. Right. And I think at this juncture, given the fact that this happened in the 1940s, and I look, you know, if we look at the sort of the historical arc between how we know violence is sort of meted out by police or by private individuals when it comes to race discrimination and sort of the extreme ends, I was drawn to the fact that not only was she dragged into the car, she was also subjected to a physical harm, and ended up in a situation where she had, I believe, from what I read, she had the harm caused to her caused permanent damage to her physical being.
Well, she was bruised and battered and humiliated by being arrested and put in jail. I guess everyone who's put in jail is humiliated. Um, I don't know that there was permanent physical damage, but certainly there was emotional damage.
Yes.
She gave up her business. She gave up her manufacturing of cosmetics that she had developed specifically for the African Canadian community. And she left the province. And
Okay.
so there was really quite a segue of complications in her life as a result of this.
Okay. And the cost of that. And I think that when we, and I certainly when I'm talking to folks about consumer racial profiling and the horrific impacts that can happen to people as a result of these experiences, I did not know that she had given up her business. And I think that there's uh the profound injustice of that, and what led to her leaving the province. And certainly in the historical tellings that I've read, and the documentaries I've seen, some of those details are left out. And I think that as I look at what's happening now in society, as we are seeing an uptick in sort of racialized discrimination against particularly African Canadian communities and people of the African diaspora, I'm drawn to the fact that we need more of these sort of remembrance of where things have come from in terms of historical context, to remind us, well, while it's so important to fight for your rights, there is a cost, and obviously there's a legacy, because the last time you and I spoke, something that you said that sort of hit me quite profoundly was that even though she lost her court case, several decades later, her work and her legacy was profound in terms of what she meant in terms of symbolic activism towards pushing back against racial discrimination, or what I would see as a connection to consumer racial profiling today, and how brave and courageous she was, and others like her, in terms of taking on the injustices of whether it's formal forms of discrimination or segregation, or informal